Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to another Industry Insights webinar. If you're joining us for the first time or one of our regulars, we're really glad that you chose to spend the next hour with us. Today's webinar is a good one. It's entitled Responsible Irrigation Practices to Support Sustainable Landscapes. This is important in our current time, and during this webinar today, we'll be discussing strategies to maximize the value of green spaces today for generations to come in the communities where we live, work, and play. Here's what you can expect to learn from today's session: the value provided by landscape, questions guiding design process, choosing a manufacturer, choosing the right application method, the right components, system best management practices, product end of life or recycling, if you will, and telling the story as the designer or the installer. And to make the deal even sweeter, we're offering one landscape architecture continuing education system unit. So LACE's unit, there's one being offered for today's session. If you stay the whole time, you will also need to complete a quiz that we will send out in a follow-up email after this presentation with a copy of the recording and a link to the quiz, and pass it with a 75% or better based on the new regulations for distance learning from ASLA and LACE's. My name is Greg Rosink. I'm the product training specialist here at Hunter. And before we get into who's presenting today, I got a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, as mentioned. We'll be monitoring questions as they come in. We have a moderator looking at all the questions as they come in, and he'll be answering them as you put them in the box, as well as keying up some key questions that will be valuable for everyone to participate in the Q&A session at the end of this. If you haven't done so already, visit revitup.hunterindustries.com. It's the current promotion that we're running, where you can earn coins that can be used to buy swag, different apparel items, and you can even risk those coins for an opportunity to win this month a Rove Dashcam, Amazon Echo Auto, or you can really make some friends with your neighbors by firing up the smoker, winning the Traeger grill that we're raffling off as well. But the other great thing that you can use your coins for is donating them to charity. So Project Evergreen, American Red Cross, Blue Star Recyclers are all charities that we're working with currently that you can donate those coins to. Now, for this webinar today, we are offering 200 RevItUp coins for anybody who attends the full length of the webinar, and then an additional 200 coins for successfully passing the short quiz by August 31st, 2020. So that's up to 400 coins you can spend any way you want. It's a lot of tools and resources on our Hunter Industries website, as well as our Hunter University or training.hunterindustries.com webpage. We have a YouTube page too. We hope that you go and subscribe to that. A lot of great information, a lot of great training. Now, to get into our presenters for today, we have Bryce Carnell, Specification Support Manager at Hunter Industries, Warren Gorowitz, the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility here at Hunter Industries as well, Senior Product Training Manager, Product Manager, Kelsey Jacquard, Product Manager, Ben Sachs, Senior Marketing Manager, Tessa Norton, and our special guest, Doug Bennett from the Southern Nevada Water Authority, Conservation Manager, who's got a lot of insights on how the water works in a sustainable landscape practice. Myself, as I mentioned, Greg Rosink, and to kick off the first segment of our session here, talking about roles of water in the sustainable landscape practice, is Doug. Doug, take it away, please.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate Hunter inviting me to participate in this important webinar on a critically important topic. You know, this is the sad fact. Those of us in the landscape irrigation and landscape architecture industry often realize that more people are willing to spend $40,000 on a car that'll have a 10-year lifespan than $10,000 on a landscape that'll have a 40-year lifespan. And that's what we're up against. It's important that you realize that climate change and urban heat island are going to affect the work we do and the amount of water that plants demand, especially in urban or in arid parts of the United States. Our cities will become hotter, both because of climate change and from the urban heat island effect. Plants that don't achieve their full potential are really a waste of resources. If you've been irrigating a tree that ultimately dies because other proper practices weren't used, all of that water has been wasted. It's important that we choose adapted plants that are just not suitable just for today, but for the future, and particularly when we're planting woody species that have long lifespans, for example, trees. We need to ensure that we're selecting species that are going to have the heat tolerance to be able to endure these changes in our urban areas. And lastly, I just want to tell you that I think that all of the information bears out that trees are the most valuable investment of water resources. They help us abate that urban heat island. They provide a lot of habitat. They provide a lot of structure to the landscape. And they're also one of the more expensive components to put into a landscape. So it's critically important to make sure that we take care of our trees. I wanted to point out in this slide over on the side, oh, if you go back briefly, Greg, thank you. So what you see there is this is an oak tree, a live oak that has been there for more than 10 years. And a lot of you see that nursery stake still there. That tree has essentially been given a death sentence. It's never achieved its full potential. And what we want to see are more of these gatherings where the code allows it and the design allows it. These gatherings of plants that have more shared root space so that they can capture more water and thrive in these kinds of urban situations. Next slide. What you're seeing here are some Chilean mesquites, and in the Southwest, folks that are familiar with this tree will know that this is a very fast-growing tree. And if you give it water, it'll just take off. But one of the challenges is that with an improperly designed irrigation system, we wind up with a very limited root system and a very top-heavy tree. So in essence, these trees were blown down by a strong wind, but they really were lost to improper irrigation design. Keep in mind your irrigation design is critically important. Poor scheduling can increase urban landscape water use by about 30%. We've documented that right here in Las Vegas. Properly designed, installed, and managed irrigation systems ensure plant longevity. We want to make sure the things we invested in are here for their full capable lifespan. And lastly, a well-designed irrigation system will have superior lifespan and fewer service calls. And when we talk about sustainability, we don't want to have to be replacing either the plants, the irrigation system, or be engaging in a lot of call outs by rolling trucks to these properties. Next slide. All right, for those of you taking the quiz, this is on there. No, it's not. It's not on there. This is we all know that energy and water intersect with each other. The water energy nexus can be very complicated, but I invite you, wherever you are in the United States, to download the Sankey diagram from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. There's one for every state, and it'll give you a good idea of where the energy and water resources in your state are directed and what kinds of outcomes they have. And in many cases, you can see that these two are completely intertwined. No energy, no water, no water, no energy. Next slide. So obviously that energy has a significant carbon footprint, so water itself is going to have an embedded carbon footprint. And just to give you some quick examples from the desert Southwest, the community of Las Vegas, Southern Nevada, demands about 3.5 billion pounds of water every day. So to put that into perspective, some of you have seen Hoover Dam. It's a massive chunk of concrete. The water that we pump is equivalent to the weight of moving Hoover Dam about every 4 days. And delivering 1,000 gallons of water to a customer in my service area requires about 6.6 kilowatt hours of electricity, which is pretty typical. That's mid-range. Some systems have even more embedded electricity. For example, delivering drinking water via the Central Arizona project uses almost 10 kilowatt hours per 1,000 gallons. And then for those of you in coastal regions, a lot of people think it's simple to desalinate water. Why can't we just tap into the ocean? But keep in mind, desalination uses 10 to 15 kilowatt hours per 1,000 gallons, and that's before they've actually tried to push that water uphill to deliver it to you. So you're pushing it from the ocean back inland, and that's always going to be uphill. So there'll be even more energy embedded. To put it all in perspective, kind of an exciting statistic, 20% of California's electricity and 30% of the non-industrial natural gas is used in the delivery and heating of water. And then we're in drought in a lot of areas. And keeping in mind that drought has the potential to lower lake levels, reservoir levels, and also to lower groundwater levels. And that means that we have to pump water from deeper, and that increases the carbon footprint. At the Southern Nevada Water Authority, electric energy accounts for 97% of the carbon emissions in my agency, and pumping water accounts for almost all of those electric emissions, dwarfing the vehicles we drive, the equipment we operate, the materials and the buildings that we run. Those are all represented by that tiny pie slice. So I want to talk to you about the most water intensive part of any landscape, and it's typically an irrigated lawn. In many parts of the US, you live in places where irrigation may not be required to grow a lawn, but in the arid, hot regions, these can have a huge water footprint and thus a huge carbon footprint. A typical Las Vegas lawn here gets about 10 feet of water applied to it annually. And watering the lawn releases 28 times as much carbon as it requires to maintain it with a gas-powered lawnmower. And that surprises people. The carbon footprint of the irrigation water alone is 8 times the carbon sequestration potential of the grass plants. And on a per area basis, if that lawn's not serving a function where a lawn is the appropriate application, by planting trees, you can sequester 100 times more carbon than a lawn would on a per area basis. So what can you do in the landscape design, installation, and maintenance industry? Well, first of all, in many cities, we put irrigated turf grass in places for purely decorative purposes. And we want to see that if water is a scarce resource, and we want to reduce the carbon footprint and the power used to maintain those areas, the replacement of those non-functional turf grass areas with climate resilient trees and shrubs. Where turf is appropriate, we have opportunities to use lower water use varieties and ensure that the irrigation system applies the water efficiently and uniformly. We want to use landscaping as a strategy in mitigating heat island effect. And the reason trees are vital here is because a tree has the capability of shading surrounding areas throughout the day. Most of the urban heat island effect is coming from roads, walls, buildings, and other very low albedo surfaces that absorb that heat during the day. Only a tree has the potential to fend that off. In your supply decisions, it makes sense to find other companies that share your sustainability interests. So use a supply chain of responsible companies that are managing their product supply chain effectively as well, and that'll reduce the carbon footprint of your project. And it's so hard in this industry because there are so many pressures, particularly on the landscape component of a development project, to cut corners, to cut the budget. Try not to cut corners. Quality design, installation, and maintenance ensure a long-lasting landscape, and that is truly the investment that will grow.
Doug, thank you for sharing the role of the water in the sustainable landscape practices. We're going to have Bryce tell us about how to support sustainable landscape practices through irrigation design, installation, and management. Bryce, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Let's skip to one more slide here. And the first thing we want to cover now after we heard from Doug there is talking about deciding what our water source is going to be when we're starting our design. Doug did a great job of talking about the value of water in any community that you're in, and then the embedded energy, the embedded carbon that's in water there too. So these are things that we need to think about when we start the design process. Let's go to the next slide. So obviously, water gets moved, and there's energy inside that. So as designers, we need to ask ourselves, is there a way that we could mitigate some of that embedded carbon in our water? Are there ways that we can collect water on site to irrigate the sustainable landscape that we've developed? Can we collect rainwater? Can we build a pond to collect and use that water from there? These are all questions that we need to ask ourselves. Reclaimed water is another option as well. Obviously, there's more embedded carbon in that with all of the reclamation process, but again, in areas where water is limited, and we need to ensure drinking water is delivered to communities where it is best used. Ensuring and looking into reclaimed water is high priority for those areas. Other things to think about too is water availability for the future. There's been projections that the Southwest may see anywhere from 15 to 20% less available water in the next 30 to 40 years. And we need to be conscious of that when we're thinking of our designs too. So again, ensuring water can be delivered to those landscapes just to support those ecosystem services that Doug had mentioned. In the design process, this may equate to loss of pressure, loss of water availability. So please think about upsizing all of your components, your main lines and things like that. That way, as water availability or pressure decreases over the lifespan of a project, you're prepared for that and you can still deliver water efficiently and effectively to your landscape. Let's go to the next slide. And already, I'm sure we've all seen it out there, there are regulations and laws and mandates about water use from state to state to state. Decreasing water, making water conservation a way of life. It's very important to look at your local jurisdiction to make sure that you're following those standards and hopefully exceeding those standards as well. But again, the key here is to support our sustainable landscape, and we want to make sure that we're delivering the water that needs to go again to provide all those ecosystem services to those to the community in which we find this space. Thank you.
Nice. So now we know how to select our water source and how to do so through sustainable landscape practices and installation and maintenance, but we want to go, or management. But now we're going to talk about selecting the manufacturer. So once you know your water source and all of that, you need to know how to select your manufacturer. And here's some things that you can think about when you're selecting one. Go ahead, Warren.
Thanks, Greg. So at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the manufacturer you choose has your back. How they support you throughout the entire project, from design, installation, and all the way through the maintenance after the project's been installed, is really important. You want to choose a manufacturer that has a strong product warranty that will stand behind the quality of their product, and making sure that the manufacturer is also easy to deal with when there is a product issue. Do they provide you timely support? Do they have in-field support, or are you limited to only talking to somebody on an 800 number through tech support? All this leads to reducing resources when possible, reducing your costs, and most importantly, reducing headaches along the way. Next slide. The manufacturer you choose should also provide you with education that you need in order to use the product effectively, whether you're the designer, the installation, or maintenance contractor. Next slide. Speaking of design, you want to choose products that are designed for exchangeability. So if there is a problem with the product, rather than having to replace the whole thing, are there parts available? Is it repairable? When it comes to irrigation controllers, like you see on the screen, are they expandable? So let's say the project matures and you need to add another irrigation zone. Rather than having to replace the entire controller, maybe you just have to put another module in. And then also thinking about the fact that the electronics themselves, they don't have to be discarded if they're modular. And this is really an important factor around sustainability. Are there ways to use less resources for your irrigation system? As an example, with 2-wire, it uses less wire, so it's going to also be more flexible for future expansion, again, if you need to add another zone later on. Does the manufacturer include recycled material in the products to reduce their impact on the planet? And that's really a lot more complicated than it sounds, because you want to ensure that using recycled material doesn't have a negative impact on the product durability or reliability. Let's talk about responsible practices. And then Doug mentioned earlier that it's important to choose to use a supply chain of responsible companies. Does the manufacturer invest in corporate social responsibility practices, which is really finding a balance between people, planet, and profit? Does the manufacturer have sustainability goals? And if they do, how are those reported? So hopefully, as you see, there's a lot more that goes into choosing the right manufacturer that will truly be your long-term partner to ensure your success.
That's a lot to think about when you're selecting a manufacturer, but now we're going to go into selecting the application devices that you get from those manufacturers. Kelsey, take it away.
Thanks, Greg. Choosing the right irrigation product requires an understanding of the landscape features that create the best water efficient irrigation system. There's a lot to consider. including soil type, plant density, water needs, growth patterns, site use, weather conditions, and cost, all before choosing the right irrigation devices. Remember, our goal is to deliver water where it needs to go, to where the plants can use it. We hope to avoid water loss through overspray, runoff, or irrigated non-planted areas. For large areas with similar plant materials and a relatively low growth profile, use rotors. Rotors have a wide range of radius options with great uniformity. For mid-range areas with similar plant materials and also a relatively low growth profile, we recommend rotary nozzles on pop-ups, like the MP rotator. Similar to rotors, rotary nozzles deliver large water droplets over a target area with strong uniformity for even coverage. Spray heads may also be appropriate for these areas when used correctly. Please be aware of the mature or desired maintained plant height for these areas. We don't want plants to eventually block the spray pattern of these application devices and make them less efficient. Where we have loosely planted materials, tall plants that block the spray, trees, bubblers are a really good solution. Bubblers deliver water right at the soil level of the plant. There are bubbler nozzles as an option that install on pop-ups for a nice clean retraction, and also subsurface bubbler products like the root zone watering systems that deliver water and oxygen directly to the roots. Micro irrigation, including drip line and point source emitters, also deliver water right where it's needed, avoiding water lost to misting and evaporation. Product placement and zone areas are affected by whether the landscape is in full sun or shade or both. Wind will also play a role in head spacing. For overhead irrigation, make sure you have at least head-to-head coverage, if not a little more overlap to account for wind. Check the manufacturer's catalog for the maximum spacing ratings for the product selected and try not to exceed those spacings. Next slide, please. Going into precip rates, knowing the soil type will help determine the best water application rate for the landscape. The precipitation rate is how much water is applied across the irrigated area. Some products put water down faster than even sandy soils can absorb. This ultimately leads to runoff, especially on slopes, which wastes water and pollutes waterways. With slower precipitation rates, the water applied can better match the soil's intake rate, allowing the water to soak deep into the soil without saturating the top layer and causing runoff. Products like rotors and rotary nozzles have that really nice low precipitation rate, along with even coverage, which helps prevent runoff and pooling. Micro irrigation has a wide range of precip rates. So while micro irrigation is a very efficient water delivery system, it can still put water down too fast for certain applications. So just be aware of the landscape needs and your runtimes. Another important aspect of precip rates is whether they are matched across the area. That means the same amount of water is applied across the entire zone area. All MP rotator type nozzles have matched precipitation, meaning at any arc or any radius, the same amount of water is applied across the area of coverage. For a general rule, we do not want to mix and match application devices within the same delivery zone, as they will apply different amounts of water across the landscape, leading to pooling in some areas and dry spots in others. So now slowing down that precip rate will mean that runtimes have to increase to put the necessary amount of water down. Keep in mind that just because the runtime increases does not mean we're necessarily using more water. For example, if we have one spray nozzle running at 2 gallons a minute for 10 minutes, we use 20 gallons a minute, or we use 20 gallons, right? For that same area, we can use an MP rotator at half a gallon a minute running for 30 minutes for a total of 15 gallons used. That's still a 25% water savings. And you can get away with putting down less water overall because the water is applied more effectively. There's less water lost to misting, runoff, and poor coverage. When changing to these slower precip rate products, there are some strategies you can use to avoid excessively long runtime schedules. For new systems, using low precip products like MP rotators instead of spray nozzles allows you to put more heads on one zone. These larger zones with longer run times help mitigate those water windows. And with many controllers, you can stack or overlap programs to work around those water windows as well. We need to understand the landscape and how you want to apply that targeted usable water before deciding on the irrigation product. Now let's talk about pressure. Pressure is like the heart of the irrigation system. A very wise product manager has told me that pressure gauges are our stethoscope to help design and troubleshoot irrigation systems. It is very important to have an idea of the available dynamic pressure before designing a system. Available pressure from the water source will determine the irrigation products chosen, the size of the zones, and the efficiency of the irrigation system. Make sure to check the charts in manufacturers' catalogs for the optimal pressure for the product, whether it's micro irrigation, pop-ups, or rotors. Too much or too little pressure will greatly reduce the effectiveness and the efficiency of the irrigation system. Pressure regulation is a really good way to reduce the flow demand on systems with high pressure. Next slide, please. With pressure regulation becoming mandatory for spray sprinklers in many states in the United States, check your state regulations for more information or visit our support page for ProSpray pop-ups. Pressure regulated pop-ups help reduce flow rates, eliminate misting from the nozzles, and they also balance the heads so each nozzle sees the same pressure. Some pressure regulating pop-ups are regulated to 30 psi for sprays, and others are regulated to 40 or 45 psi for the optimal performance from rotary nozzles. Many pressure regulated pop-ups also have an option for flow reduction in the case of a missing nozzle. These can save up to 30 gallons a minute lost in the event of a missing nozzle and protect the landscape from erosion. For other high pressure systems, there are also pressure regulated 3/4 inch rotor options to maximize the efficiency from rotor nozzles. Pressure can also be controlled at the valve. For smaller zones, you can regulate the pressure down at the valve instead of the heads, or better yet, you can use a two-step approach to regulation for high pressure systems. If you have 100 psi or more, let's say, at the main, step the pressure down at the valve to a safer 70 psi or so with an adjustable valve pressure regulator, and then step the pressure down at the heads so each nozzle sees the same pressure. This keeps the system safe and efficient. For drip and micro irrigation systems, control the pressure at the valve with drip zone kits. These come pre-assembled with a valve, a filter, and a pressure regulator to make sure the microsystem runs at its best. With proper pressure and scheduling, the low flows from the micro irrigation system will help avoid runoff while allowing the water to gently soak into the soil. And lastly, I want to talk about check valves. Check valves are a quick and simple way to prevent the water in the pipe from all draining out after every irrigation cycle. Pop these check valves into the bottom of the pop-up or rotor sprinkler, or specify them pre-installed at the factory from the start and save water. Other check valves can be installed underneath the heads or on risers below shrub adapters for slope irrigation applications. Again, check valves are a simple way to prevent low head drainage and save the water in the line between cycles. For the best irrigation products for the job, we need to understand the landscape itself. We need to use the right pressure for the product, install check valves where needed, maintain the irrigation system, and schedule the irrigation properly. There's a lot to think about, but it's all very well worth it for the right irrigation system. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Kelsey. And although application devices can add a lot of efficiency to the system, they're only as efficient as the management practices that go into it. So we're going to let Ben talk about selecting the management devices that are appropriate for your system. Ben, take it away, please.
Thanks, Craig. I appreciate it. And thanks, Kelsey. That was some really great info. Let's stick with the anatomy metaphor for a second here. If pressure is the pulse of your irrigation system, I'm going to go out on a limb and say the control system and sensor network is essentially your brains and or even your nervous system of your irrigation system. It's making the decisions for you, turning valves on and off, getting information back from the field. It's definitely essential to any sort of sustainable best practice addition to any landscape. So these irrigation controller sensor capabilities certainly play a huge role in any sort of conservation efforts. So nowadays, one of the main questions you'll hear surrounding any irrigation controller, or most any consumer electronic product for that matter, is my controller smart? Of course, the terms smart watering or even smart controller have been around for decades, but in today's world, we're in a bit of a transition, a little bit of a paradigm shift away from what used to be the norm, and what used to be considered smart doesn't necessarily really apply as much in today's environment in the irrigation industry. So in past years, something as simple as even the addition of a rain sensor to a standalone controller essentially made your system smarter, right? You got an on-site rain sensor hooked up to a standalone controller that helps prevent any unnecessary irrigation when it's raining. That's a smart decision for your controller. Similarly, adding any other additional on-site sensors to measure, let's say, evapotranspiration, ET, or even a dedicated weather station to measure solar radiation, temperature, rainfall, anything along those lines. The dedicated sensor talking to a standalone controller used to be the norm for any sort of smart control platform. Similarly, there used to be a lot of ET historical input data that would go hand in hand with smart control in past years. And while that functionality and data is still very relevant today, when I think of the majority of smart controllers in the market nowadays, most of these systems now require an internet connection. I tend to blame this on one thing in particular, the Internet of Things movement, or IoT. I'm sure y'all are familiar with the IoT movement, where essentially everything is hosted in the cloud and accessible remotely via a smartphone, a tablet, or even your PC computer. And nearly everything can be controlled by your phone or your fingertips these days. Anything from a dog food bowl being refilled to your indoor lighting, your outdoor lighting, your thermostat, doorbell, security system, you name it. Everything can be accessed remotely with an internet connection and makes things smarter for the end user there. And so the irrigation industry is really no different. As we transition away from the older smart term into the 21st century, meaning a internet connection with your irrigation control system, we gain valuable resources at our fingertips. Similarly, we'll be saving a ton of time, a ton of money, and a ton of precious resources with this remote irrigation management capabilities of an internet connected control system there. So 21st century control systems basically can now adjust irrigation run times, watering frequencies, or even suspend future irrigation based on real-time and precise weather information. I tend to joke that some control platforms are like Miss Cleo from the early 90s, the infomercials you used to see all the time, to call me now for my free meeting. It's the psychic controllers that can predict the future and prevent any unnecessary irrigation based on highly precise weather information. It's invaluable to have that kind of detail coming to your controller from any sort of internet connection. So having more accurate weather data than ever before helps to increase essentially watering when it's hot, decrease watering when it's cooler, and essentially prevent any unnecessary watering in inclement weather. So with a smart internet connection, we also gain the ability to monitor more sensor and even valve, solenoid, or even wiring information and push alarm notifications directly to users when system issues arise. So the ability to receive automated alerts in the event of an alarm is invaluable to any irrigation or landscape professional. Let's say we get a spray head gets kicked off or run over by a lawnmower, and we have a flow sensor in the irrigation system. Most software platforms these days can push a notification directly to the user or even the site manager to let them know of the unusually high flow alert, or could potentially even shut down the suspect zone autonomously. So this ability to be alerted by your system remotely helps tremendously in terms of smart control and having more information available at your fingertips, not having to be on site to make any sort of adjustments or maintenance or repairs. But push notifications and alerts aren't the only aspect or benefit of a smart internet connected control system. Having the ability to adjust irrigation schedules, run times, water days, you name it, anything in your control system from essentially anywhere in the world at any time is a huge, I've said this many times now, we're saving time, we're saving labor, we're saving resources by being able to control and make changes remotely from anywhere in the field. So service calls that used to consume precious gasoline driving from to and from the site just to make a few small adjustments to the watering schedule can now be accomplished from the comfort of your own home or office. So that's a huge benefit to anyone managing multiple sites. Say you're living in the Midwest or the Northeast, and you know you got a cold front coming through a big region there. you can turn a whole bunch of controllers off automatically from the comfort of your home office or anything like that. There's a huge benefit there, a lot of time and resource saving, big sustainable effort on that front. So between the highly precise real-time weather data that we get nowadays and the ability to receive instant alerts or alarms and 24/7 access to your controller from essentially anywhere in the world, this 21st century smart internet connected control system absolutely helped to provide sustainable solutions to any new or existing landscape. In this day and age, though, smart irrigation control systems can get even smarter when paired with on-site sensors such as a rain sensor, a freeze sensor, a wind sensor, or even a flow sensor. So it's kind of funny. We've almost come full circle now in the meaning of smart control here, with having on-site sensors now paired with your internet connected controller. So having that on-site sensor is just as valuable today as it used to be in previous years when using smart control. So let's take an example there. So let's say we paired a smart internet connected controller with soil moisture sensors that are installed in the landscape. Those can work hand in hand to apply water to the landscape only when it's absolutely necessary. So taking that even a step further, irrigation control systems in the agricultural market can even utilize LiDAR scans or even satellite imagery to interpret real-time soil moisture levels in their grow fields, which is pretty sweet if you ask me. I would love to have that functionality in the residential commercial application, but being able to take high-tech information and utilize that data in your control system is very beneficial to any system. But in terms of residential and commercial applications, the addition of a flow sensor can be one of the simplest sustainable initiatives that you can incorporate to a control system. In my personal opinion, the internet connected smart control platforms of today make the most sense when paired with a flow sensor. So not only does this help to quantify how much water is being used just for the irrigation, it can also help indicate any potential leaks and water waste going on within your system. So having the ability to monitor flow rates, flow totals, or even manage irrigation schedules based on these flow rates and flow totals certainly helps to conserve precious water resources in any landscape. So what does this all mean? Essentially, oftentimes smart control platforms can boast anywhere from, let's say, 30 to 50% water savings up front. Most any irrigation manufacturer will advertise that type of water saving with any smart control platform that they're offering these days. And while that does reign true for a lot of new installations, a smart controller alone will not fix all of your problems or save all of your water. So Greg kind of alluded this a little bit earlier, but I tend to joke that your irrigation controller is only as smart as your dumbest component. So while it's great to install a brand new internet connected smart controller, if your pipes are undersized, if your heads aren't spaced properly, if you got improper pressure regulation, you're using sprays when you should be using drip, anything along those lines, a smart controller won't rectify all of those issues for you. But it is a great starting point and can certainly alert you of any potential issues, whether it's above ground or in ground in your system. So all of these management practices work together to help save water, help save materials, help save money, and also to help provide a more sustainable irrigation solution all around. That's pretty much it for me in terms of control platforms and sensors. Bryce, what do you got for us about installation and maintenance?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So, okay, we've got the sustainably designed landscape. We're going to move forward. We've made all the right decisions about the irrigation design, and we feel pretty good about that. What do we do next? Well, we're going to turn it over to a contractor to have it installed. But things that we can do to make sure that it's installed the way that we are intending to be installed, obviously, is working with a licensed professional. Hopefully, we're all working with licensed contractors to implement the designs that we've created. Some states require additional licensings when it comes to working with water because it is a valuable resource and it should be treated as such. So that's really great. But in addition to that, we've heard about education from both Doug and Warren now. We need to include education specifications within our plans, either through plan notes or in the written specification packages, to ensure that contractors they have the knowledge to install the products that have been specified. Manufacturers offer training, whether it's online or in person, with certifications. So I highly recommend that you include notes on your plans that say that the installing contractor received certification from manufacturer to install specific products. Really great way to ensure that the products are installed the way that they're intended to, because we all know that issues happen in the field and things change. And as clearly as we develop our irrigation plans, they may not be installed exactly the way that we want them to be. So as long as we're communicating the intent of the design and the intent of this idea of sustainability and water conservation, that's what we need to follow through with the project when changes do occur. In addition to that, though, too, we need to be requiring detailed as-builts from the installing contractors. You know, the as-builts send the message to the maintenance contractors or the people maintaining the project as it moves on, what happened in where they can find specific products, how things were installed, where zones come on and off. It's a very good message sending to the next generation, if you will, of the people who will be involved with the project. So speaking of maintenance, always a very good idea to include a maintenance specification with your project. Again, the paradigm's changing with sustainable concepts and the ideas of water conservation, and the standards of maintenance need to be updated. So a very good idea to include maintenance best performance management practices in your specifications. Ensure who you're going to be working with, or think about who you're going to be working with as the project kind of moves on, and understand their ability to maintain or to work on a project, and make sure that you're kind of designing around that too. So you're looking at the back end of a project before you're designing the front end, just to ensure really the longevity of the project, of the entire landscape and of the irrigation system. Again, we want all these plastic components to go in the ground. We want them to last a very long time. We do not want to replace them. We want to make sure they're going to be there, make sure they can be maintained. Also, again, back to education, include those education specifications within your maintenance specification as well. Require maintenance contractors working on sites to receive the education from manufacturers to ensure that projects are going to be maintained the way that they should be. So with that, I think we've got one more speaker coming in.
Thank you. And you made a good point there. These products are going to be in the ground for a really long time. And if they're designed properly and installed properly, they'll last longer. But everything has an end of life, right? So Warren, will you tell us about what the product end of life looks like in our industry?
Thanks, Greg. So at some point, like you said, products have end of life. A landscape has an end of life, or maybe it's getting reborn into a new life, a new type of landscape. And so as an industry, our goal should be, how do we keep the products out of the landfill? Does the material that we're using, especially when we're talking about irrigation equipment, does it have another value rather than just being thrown away? And by the way, does anybody know where is away? When you throw something away, where does it go? Where's away? Much of the irrigation industry's products are made from petroleum-based plastics and metals, and many of those materials can be recycled and reused to make something else. We see this today currently more common in the agricultural side as it relates to drip tape and drip irrigation recycling, but I see this as becoming more prevalent through the irrigation industry going forward. And as we look outside the irrigation industry, we see a lot of industries that are trying to tackle the end of life of their products. And irrigation controllers are electronic, and they're considered e-waste, and they can be recycled. So working with a manufacturer that has a program to recycle irrigation controllers, I think is important. This is also a good opportunity for me to very quickly plug the Irrigation Association common interest group that was formed around sustainability in 2019. And really the goal of that group is to bring the irrigation industry together to talk about sustainability challenges and develop solutions, and trying to get ahead of some of this stuff before it becomes required. And so if you're interested in that and you're an Irrigation Association member, we'd love to have you part of the Sustainability Common Interest Group. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea around, what do we do with product when it does get to its end of life?
Now, everything we've talked about today is great practice in supporting a sustainable landscape with irrigation practices, best management practices, but it's not enough just to have all of that done and be the forefront and leader of someone who's doing this on a daily basis. Unless you're sharing your story, which I'm gonna have Tessa share with us right now, you're not doing everything you can. So Tessa, tell us how we can share the story of what we're doing so that other people can start adopting some of these same processes and overcome these challenges.
Absolutely. So now that you have learned to walk the walk, right? So we're being sustainable in our practices and our maintenance. We now want to challenge you to talk the talk, and obviously promoting the good works that you're doing. It helps you from on a personal and professional prestige level. It helps generate business. But again, we really want to challenge you to share your stories, because at the end of the day, sharing your stories about sustainable practices helps to inspire others to do the same. And that's why we wanted to add a little bit of a couple of slides at the very end to discuss how you can best do this. Greg, if you can head to the next slide. So I think really, where to begin at the beginning, how do you tell your story? And we're going to go back to some really elementary school basics of how do you tell a story. Well, you've got your main characters. That's you're the main character, whether that's because you are designing the landscape, maybe you're the irrigation consultant, maybe you are the maintenance team, maybe you are the installer, maybe you are the municipality or the end customer who wants to promote your good works and sustainability within your community. So making sure you're not only talking about yourself as the main character, but also all of these other key players is going to help when you're trying to drive the message out. When you have more players mentioned in your story, the more players are going to want to share, and we'll talk about the different channels that you can share on the next slide. We also want to talk about settings. So, we've talked about a lot of different regions. We've talked about if you're up north and you're discussing winterization. Obviously, we've talked a lot about arid regions and water issues. You may be in a tropical zone. People like reading stories about regions that are similar to their own. So ensuring that you are identifying the type of landscape that you're working with. We find that a lot of times if someone wants to work on a project that's a municipal project or a large park project or a sports field, then really they're looking for stories about other similar projects. And at the end of the day, it's a problem solution story, right? What was the problem that we were trying to solve? And then how did we solve it? And that can be, the problem of sustainability and the issues, whether it's water management or end of life product. And then what was the solution? And we talked about a lot of solutions today. But I also really want to challenge you guys to think about who your audience is. So when you're putting together your story so that you can disseminate it to all of the different channels, are you speaking to other landscape architects? Maybe that's going to be something that has more technical details in it. Or are you talking to the general public and you really need to step back from those technical details and explain some of the theories behind the principles of why sustainability is important? If you could head to the next slide, please, Greg. Thanks. So where can you tell your story is important. And in marketing, we talk about the 3 different media platforms. So we've got owned media, earned media, and paid media. So on the front end, this owned media, this is the concept of the spaces where you completely and 100% own the message. So are you telling your story on your website? Are you telling it potentially you have brochures that you hand out to customers, or if you're a municipality, visitors to your space? Emails is a great way to tell your current customers. Social media obviously is a great way to disseminate stories and information. Review sites. Now, review sites in a lot of instances is earned media, but also there is a space if you own your business, then you can also include images like on Yelp or on Houzz, things like that. So making sure that you're owning your part of the story on those review sites. And then point of purchase. So you may not be a distributor with a storefront, but potentially you have an office where customers are coming and checking out some of your good works. Do you have images on your wall of some of the great projects that you've worked on? From an earned media standpoint, public relations is a big one. And when we think about public relations, it's really trying to target a lot of the places where we have paid media as well. So you're reaching out to local a local newspaper, a local TV station. Maybe you're targeting some of the industry publications like the IA, the IGN, and Lawn and Landscape, Landscape Architect. So those are some of the great industry publications that we have. And potentially you're also looking to have some academic using your sites as case studies for local academies that are potentially teaching horticulture. Speaking events, that could be trade shows. And I also think that speaking events combined with community relations is a great way where you can invite the public in to see some of the projects that you've worked on and give them a tour. We see that a lot of municipalities have some really great programs around continual monthly tours of their sites, sometimes more often, and that's a really great way to engage the public and explain some sustainable practices that they can take home and use in their own space as well. And then obviously there's paid media as well, and you know, there's print, digital advertising, direct mail, radio, TV, but I wanted to specifically spend a little bit of time talking about outdoor. Now, normally when we say outdoor paid media, we're talking about billboards, but I think a lot of times in the spaces in which we work and play, that it's a lot of times has to do with these on-site educational signage that we see in a lot of spaces. And we find a lot of value in these. And so I would absolutely suggest that you include these in your plans for parks and different spaces that you're designing, because it's really wonderful for residents to go around, whether you're talking about native plants that are local to the area, or maybe you are trying to promote plants that for pollination. Maybe you're talking about wastewater treatment and or reclaimed water use, and really delving deeper than a simple caution sign, right? And so hopefully this inspires you to take a look maybe at some of your past projects that you've worked on that you're very proud of from a sustainability standpoint, and go out and spread the good word.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tessa. So from now, we know the process of choosing the right applications, how the water source and how to pick the water source. We know how to manage these devices once they're in. We've kind of come full circle on the management side and what the product looks like at the end of its life. And to wrap us up, Doug's going to share a little message with us while I look at some of the questions that have come in. Doug, take it away.
Thanks so much, Greg. You know, I want to tell just a short story. Actually, it's a 20-year long story, but I'll summarize it. But in 2002, the Colorado River flowed at just 25% of what we consider to be normal. And it put Las Vegas into a crisis situation. We had to immediately cut more than 20,000 acre feet, or about 8 billion gallons of water, out of our water budget in a single year. And we implemented a lot of programs and so forth. And surprisingly, we were able to cut 16 billion gallons of water use out of a fast-growing community's demands in a single year. And a lot of people said, what do you attribute that to? Well, we did some calculations and we figured out we had all these programs and we tried to estimate what they might have produced. And we found that of everything that was accomplished, we could only really attribute about 25% of it to the specific programs that we were running. 75% of what was accomplished came from people making good choices. And I want to use that story to emphasize to you, we heard a lot today about technologies and techniques that can make a landscape more water efficient. But you can't just lean on those technologies and techniques. It takes people like you to commit to being a professional, to fully believe in your capabilities and why you're doing these things. When you fully believe that you have these capabilities and they should be used, then you have the ability to advocate for them with your client and other stakeholders. There are a lot of companies, a lot of people doing business that haven't given much thought to all the resources that go into their landscape. And landscapes can be part of the problem or part of the solution, and sometimes a little bit of both. I'm hoping that those of you that are professional enough to tune in to a webinar like this are the exact same kinds of people that will go out and stand up for these principles and push them forward, because you are ultimately the most vital link in this process.
Now we have a little bit of time to go into questions, and we had a few great questions that came in that I want to share with all of you. First of all, and this question would be for Ben. What is 2-wire and how does it work? You mentioned that earlier in the presentation.
Sure. So 2-wire is a supplemental option for installing irrigation control. So if you think about a traditional irrigation controller, you've got a station wire and a common wire going to every single valve throughout your entire landscape. So you got a whole, potentially, you got 20 plus zones, you got a whole big bundle of wire being trenched and navigated throughout an entire landscape. That uses up a ton of copper and a ton of material and resources and labor digging through the earth, trenching, pulling wire, doing everything like that. So 2-wire or decoder technology is a simpler option of conventional wiring. You pretty much route a 2-wire path throughout your entire landscape, and then you just splice in what's called a decoder in every valve box that essentially acts as a switch. It takes a signal from the controller, says, hey, I'm station 5, I'm supposed to turn on, turns on that solenoid, and makes a much more efficient operation. So one of the main benefits of 2-wire control is being able to run more stations simultaneously. And that's a huge win in terms of sustainable initiatives, because you can run more watering in tighter water windows. You can have more simultaneous stations. Obviously, if you have enough water available and the hydraulics in your system are compliant, you can run a bunch of stations simultaneously, where previously you may have been running stacked individual zones all throughout the night and taking a lot more time and using more water that way. So 2-wire is just another option. It's typically used in mid-size and light commercial applications. Since you have more stations, more real estate to cover, you need a more efficient means of turning on zones and getting stuff activated. But it's just an alternative to conventional wiring of a traditional terminal strip to each individual zone. It does offer a huge opportunity to save time, money, and resources in terms of material and labor. We are big 2-wire proponents here.
There's an entire webinar opportunity on just explaining what 2-wire is and the benefits of it. So that was a great, concise answer. Thanks, Ben. Now this one's directed to Warren, and I think we might need to support him on it. But they said, can someone please send Warren a picture for that bare wall behind him?
Yeah, I know, it definitely needs it. Well, speaking of bare, now since we said it, normally what's in my office, since we're going to humanize this, is my teddy bear here, Campbell. So, but I wanted to, I didn't want to distract from my presentation having the bear in the photo. So anyway, but yeah, I know it needs a little bit of help. I need some decorating help.
The secretary bear.
Yes.
Now,
Campbell.
I'm going to give this one to you, Doug. And if you don't have an answer for it, maybe Bryce can follow that up. But what are the best practices for watering a new 15-gallon low water use tree?
Good question. I think one of the things that I see in drip irrigation that's the wrong thing to do is focusing all of your emitters on top of that 15-gallon container. So you not only have to water it and transition it from its nursery container into the mature landscape, so you've got to provide water there, and then you got to have the ability to be able to expand out either through valving or through inline drip tubing or something, where you can be providing water outside of that container width, and encouraging those roots to grow out farther and farther and support that tree in the long haul. So there's a lot of good information on most of the manufacturers' websites about how to support a tree, but do not just put a big glob of emitters on top of that container and expect that that's going to support it for a lifetime.
Why don't I give this next question to Kelsey? Do you recommend providing bubblers for trees that are planted in lawns that are covered by rotary nozzles or MP rotators?
It's always good to irrigate your trees separately from the rest of your lawn if you can. If the whole zone's already together, then you're probably getting enough water with the MP rotators. They usually run a pretty long time. You get really good deep watering with MPs. But if you're doing a brand new system, I would definitely put bubblers separately zoned from MP rotators and irrigate the trees on their own. Like Doug was saying, it's nice to try to encourage those roots of a tree to grow outward. So using multi-stream type bubbler nozzles are a really nice tool because you can spread that water from the bubblers out. And then over time, even you can change those bubbler nozzles over to MP rotators and irrigate away from the tree. So that way you can encourage that root growth outward. So you don't end up with all these roots stuck really close to the tree trunk.
I think that sums it up. Now, Ben, I'll go back to you on this question. This is, how do you determine to choose either a HydroWise controller with 2-wire or a traditional wiring system or conventional wiring system? Will the cost be about the same on the controller at about 16 valves?
You know, that's a pretty tough question to answer off the top of my head. It really matters, depends on what kind of price you're getting on your copper wire, what size wire you're installing. And like you said, 16 zones. I mean, with our easy decoder system that we have now available from Hunter, we're seeing the break-even point on 2-wire versus conventional systems closer to almost 12 to 15 zones, whereas previously it used to be around 20 to 25 zones where you could save money on upfront costs for the hardware for a 2-wire system, but you're not spending as much money on labor and material routing 16 plus cables throughout your whole project. So it depends on what the cost of your wire is in your market. Ultimately, one thing I do like to point out though is oftentimes a smart internet connected controller tends to be a little bit higher than just a traditional standalone type controller, but that money invested up front will essentially save you more money in the back end and potentially generate some revenue opportunities by being able to manage multiple sites and being able to control systems remotely. You have the opportunity to take care of issues quicker and manage systems more efficiently from the home. So while the upfront cost with a smart connected controller might be a little bit more, the less maintenance calls and service requirements that come with it is certainly useful and will help save money on the back end. So it's kind of to each their own. It depends on the cost of individual controllers, size of the project, cost of the materials. But in terms of 2-wire versus conventional, like I said, we typically see nowadays on our lower end easy decoder system 12 to 15 zones. A traditional 2-wire decoder system, we'd see, like I said, 20 to 25 zones might be your break-even point, but it all depends on cost in your market.
You know, we're out of time. We're past our 1-hour mark, so I do want to wrap this up. Thinking about all those that have joined us for the hour, I don't want to eat up any more of their time. We do have a few more questions, but I will add those questions into the email that goes out, and I'll have the professionals answer each one of those questions so that everyone can get an opportunity to hear the question and see the answer. So for us now, everybody give a wave and say thanks. We really appreciate you all stopping by, taking the time out of your day to join us for another one of our Industry Insight webinars. We value your time, we value your business, and from all of us at Hunter Industries, we thank you for coming by. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.